Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for attending the next part of the Gridfox webinar series. This is number 3 out of 5. Just to remind you of how we set this thing up, the chat box has been disabled, but we do encourage you to put questions in the Q&A area, and we'll get through them either live as I'm talking, or I'll come back to them at the end, depending on where we are. So just by way of introduction, I'm Craig Nathan Moss, Head of Engagement here at Gridfox, and my role is really to work with our users to identify what's going well, what we could potentially develop, what's intuitive, and just help them achieve the goals that they're trying to look towards as well. So today we are going to be on number 3, as I mentioned. We've already done getting started with tables and adding data, which was the most basic of our sessions. We then progressed to exploring all the fields that Gridfox has to offer and adding multiple tables on the 2 we already had. And today it's going to be about Kanban boards, charts, Gantt charts, calendars, and all the different types of screens that you can build with Gridfox. Now, this will be shown on the website afterwards. So just to remind you, if you go to gridfox.com, there's a top part here that says webinars, and then you'll see previous recordings displayed on there, and obviously the dates of our next webinars shown down here as well. Without any further ado, let's get going. So I have created a project specifically for this session. Just to give you an indication as to how it's set up, we have 2 tables. We have projects and we have tasks. I've used a selection of different fields just to show the variance in some cases, but also some are important to show how some of these charts work later on. The projects is the parent table and the tasks is the child table. So in user mode, what that looks like is we've got the projects here, and if I click into one of these records, such as rebranding for gym shoes, then I can see all the tasks associated with that project underneath there. Same with tasks, this is a list of everything that I've put in here, and I've also put some filters in which we touched on, and that will just basically segregate 2 projects I have under that tasks filter. So let's start going to Screen Builder, and we'll work down the list of screens that you can do. Now in Screen Builder, all these screens can be found under Add New. So we have a table, which is what you're looking at in the background. That will add a new table in. We've got a board such as a Kanban board. Now, I'm conscious that some people might not be aware of some of this terminology. So it'll help me explain it in more detail when we get up to that point. But it's effectively a different way of visualizing what status things are at as you're working through a project. And I should also mention at this point that all these different screens I'm about to show you are not housing data. All the data is coming from these tables. So the screens are just an overlay of any information that's shown within our projects or our tasks. A calendar will be used in the same way as you're used to from your Google calendars or whatever tool you use out there. A Gantt chart is another way of tracking progress throughout a specific time period of those projects. And it puts them in a nice linear order. And a dashboard will just allow us to build any sort of charts or line graphs or funnel charts or whatever you need on there. So I'll show you a full range of those as we go through. Let's start off with the Kanban board. So the idea behind this is you can group things based on different criteria. So it's quite a popular tool in the marketing world. You may have seen something called Trello, which is very similar to this. And all we're going to do is we're going to follow the on-screen instructions to get to where we need. So first of all, it's saying which table out of projects and tasks do I want information to be pulled from? Well, I've got more things in tasks than I have projects, so I'll select that one and click next. Now, which columns would you like to display? So using these top columns here, would I like them all to be by status? And you can see now in the background, it'll give me things like backlog, in progress, or completed. Or would I like it by projects? That will split it between the 2 projects I've got running. In this case, we're going to go for status. And when I click next, it's asking me what information I want to see on these horizontal lines, which will look more like cards once we start to populate them. So I'll have the name of the task, and maybe I'll just have the due date for now as well, so I know what we're aiming towards. Now, when I click next, those are the fundamental steps required to create a board. And if I save that and go back to the project, you'll see how it looks like. So I've got each one of these in different stages. The great thing is I can drag and drop them where I need. So if brand design suddenly starts to be worked on, I can put it in the in progress area, and you'll see it drop in here. I can do that with any of those cards as well. But I think we can do something more to this to make it more appealing and easier to understand. So back in Screen Builder, these are the optional steps that we can take to just spruce it up a little bit. And the first one is you can select an icon to your cards. I haven't put icons in all of these, but I have done it in one of them just to show what this looks like. So let me save that and go back to the project. And you'll see that it's just added the little Gridfox logo into that area here. Now, I don't know how people are going to work with this. It might be that you want little caricatures just to improve internal motivation. It might be company logos that you're working on just to give that brand representation. It's entirely up to you, but it allows you to put that little logo in there. Go back to Screen Builder. The next one is a column total. That's probably not relevant for the project I'm demonstrating on here, but some other people use this as a sales pipeline. So instead of having backlog, in progress, and completed, it might be that you have something like interest, conversation, quoted, demo, and then potentially customer. And you could show all the potential revenue through each one of those stages. So you could say, look, we've got £10,000 sat at quoted, which is quite a good indicator that some of that's going to convert. So not relevant for this. You'll see if I click it, it just brings those things across the top. And don't worry about those figures that I'm showing here. This is just for something else I'm going to demonstrate shortly. Search fields will allow you to search the cards. So if you have loads and loads of tasks on here, it might not be that easy to locate something. And let's say that I want to do it by, I don't know, name. So I can put a name field in there as well. Now, if I go back and save that and show you what this looks like in the project, it is not this search criteria here, where you can search for anything by keywords. So if I put, for example, research, because I can see that there, and it'll bring back anything like that. What this does is it allows you to filter. So the same as what I showed you on tables, click filter. I can now filter by, in this case, name, because that's the criteria I asked it to filter on. So put research in there. I can apply that filter and save it as another filter on the board, and it will then just show everything with the words research in. Okay, let's go back to Screen Builder. The next thing, and probably the most important thing, certainly from my perspective, is adding some colors in there. And the reason for that is I think it just transforms this board and makes it a lot easier to follow. So I'm going to do it by status. Now, if I save it and go back to project, you'll see each one of these has a color, and it just at a glance makes it a lot easier to see what is at which stage. And if I move them, the color will shift to green because it's completed. So I've done it as a traffic light system. You can set these however you want when you create your fields and identify those list items. And the final thing in here is row settings. Now with row settings, what we're basically saying is all these cards are segregated by columns. So that is a vertical representation of these things. But you can also put a horizontal representation in too. So it won't make any sense to have status because we have that going in the columns. But if I put this as project and save it, what we now have is we've got it broken down by projects. So you've still got the same type of setup, things in backlog, in progress, and completed. But what you'll see is they are now under these top headings, which is dictated by the projects that I have. So that is the first type of board or screen that you can create in Gridfox. The next one is we can do a calendar. If I click calendar, again, it's asking me for a title. And this is now going to ask me to populate things in here. So we're going to work down the list of all these drop-down fields. We'll call it calendar. We can change that name, but I'm not feeling that creative today. And it's going to ask us, again, where do we want this information to be pulled from? Well, task has more, so we'll use that. And then it's going to say what type of calendar style do you want. I'll show you both, but let's start off with grid. Grid is effectively like your monthly view on your Google Calendar. So it'll show every single day in there. Column puts it more into the weekly status. So you can see things day by day. Now the title of this, so this is saying when it's showing entries on your calendar, what do you want to see in that little chunk? We'll put the name in there. You can add secondary fields if you want to. And it's also saying, how do you want events to be shown? Is it all day or is it timed? Now, based on my fields, I only have date fields. I don't have anything that's done by timed. So it's not going to make any sense if I click timed. But you can imagine if you're on a really short timescale for a customer, maybe you've got 48 hours to turn around a project. They may want to have visibility over every single hour of the day, so they know exactly what's being worked on. Now, when I clicked all day, it has created some more drop-down fields for me, which is saying, when do you want to show your start date and your end date on the calendar? So I want the start date to be the start date. Now, I actually want the end date to probably be the start date as well in my scenario. Let me show you due date, and then I'll explain why that is. I'm also going to put a color in there. In fact, let me leave it for now because I'll explain that shortly. So I've got my all day events in here. Now, the reason why I wanted to suggest, actually, I'll just put the start date in to know when projects are starting, is because this is quite difficult to review. So I can see there's 3 more things here and it lists them all. That's just not helpful for me. The way that I'd like to work is actually, I either just want to see when things are due to start or just see when things are due to end. And when I save it like that, you'll just see how much easier that is on the eye because we've just got those key dates in there. Now the color settings will give that even better segregation. And you can do these color settings by 3 different things. So by list, now what I mean by that is when you're in fields, you can create list views. And the list views I have in here are basically the status. So I'll click on that, I'll save it there. And now you can see some color, which again makes it a lot easier to kind of work through. So I know, having looked at this, that for my traffic light system, I have completed confirm launch, I've completed this plan budget. The orange things are the ones that I'm working on, and these are the start dates. I'm slightly ahead of schedule with researching these keywords. And the red one is the one that I haven't yet begun. So as I mentioned, you could have that as start dates or end dates. But I just think visually that's going to be a lot easier to do. And the final thing on here is you can select fields to filter on. So exactly the same as I've just shown you on the Kanban board, you can basically allow that filter to work on any of those fields if you wanted to break it down. Now, the other thing that I said I'd come back to is the column style. So if I click on that and save it in there, as I mentioned before, it's showing me a 7-day week in here. So if I've got loads of tasks in one day, it's just going to be easy to review it in this way. Again, if I'm under short timescales as well. So that's the calendar, pretty much covered. The next one to go along is the Gantt chart. So this is a project management tool that basically shows things like a calendar. So it's got dates of events. However, it puts them in a timeline, so effectively you can see at a glance what should I be working on, what should be completed, and am I following that pre-planned structure. So again, we'll work through these drop downs and you'll see how this starts to form. Now I can select a table on here. Again, I'll use tasks because there's more in there. And I want the start date in this scenario to be the start date, and I do want the end date to be the due date because I want to see how long this task spans over a period of time. And in this setup, it will not be confusing to look at, which you'll see shortly. Select my Gantt title. Well, I want to put the name of what these tasks are. And I'll save it like that, just to start off with. We'll see what it looks like. So what it looks like at the moment is we have all our tasks down the left-hand side. Those task names are repeated in our bars here, and we're currently looking at it in a weekly view. Now, because these things span out for longer than what we got here, possibly 10, 14 days, then I'm going to expand this out to a period longer, and it can be monthly, but it still goes off my screen. So in my case, quarterly is going to capture all the things that I need in here. And I can just see exactly when these things fall. Now, if I go back to Screen Builder, I'm just going to start building on that basic Gantt chart that I created, because I also want to do this by parent. So I mentioned this before, the tasks is my child table, the projects is my parent table. And the reason it's described as that is because my projects have tasks. So because it has things, it becomes a parent. Okay, so in my Gantt chart, I'm now going to group things by the project. And when I do that, on the left-hand side, you'll now see that these tasks fall under the specific project. So there's no confusion here over what I'm working on. And again, I'm going to add these color settings in using my list status. All right. So let's go and have a look and see what we've got. If we go back to project, it's starting to look a lot easier to follow. So I can see that under my first project of rebranding, I have a confirmed launch date which has been complete, and I'm now working on internal comms and customer feedback, and I can see that that is falling in these months. Again, if I want to get more granular, I could break it down and say, okay, internal comms started on Tuesday the 17th, and it's due to expire on, I picked the wrong one to demonstrate this on, at the 30th of September. So I can work through that just by sliding along, using the slider or this bar at the bottom as well. We'll put it back to quarter just because it shows everything on there. And then we can see the same thing for each of these projects. So it's giving us that visual representation now. There's no crossover of what we should be working on, where we are today with this blue timeline going through the center, and what we've got coming up. Now there's something else I'm going to add on here. And this is going to be, first of all, it's going to be my total complete. Now this is next to my parent field, so it's going to show in this little bit here and this little bit here. When I save that, you're going to see a percentage. And I'm also going to add a similar percentage next to each one of these tasks. So if I go to select display fields, this one is called completed. It's just how I've named it in my tables. If I save that, you've now got completion points for all of this different information. Now for me, that looks really, really good because I know exactly how far each one of these I am. I'm going to have to explain this in a little bit more detail. So if I go and start off with my tasks, first of all, in tasks, what I've built in there is a completed, and it's just a field that's a percentage field. So there is no world-beating calculation or theory behind this. It's basically a way of someone to say, right, I'm looking at a brand design. Do you know what? I reckon I'm about 20% through now. And when I save that, it is going to save us that 20%. So if I go back into my Gantt chart, we're looking for brand design, and we can see that that is now at 20%. So it's a manual input, but it is going to add to these figures. These calculations is an average of all of these figures. It's the mean. So effectively, if you added up all these totals and divided it by 4, you get 47.5. Now, we covered formulas in the last session, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I will come back to it at the end and just explain and show exactly how I've managed to get that on this Gantt chart. But hopefully that explains in enough detail how to get set up, how to start to amend it. Again, there's loads of different things you could add in these fields. I could put the due date in there if I'm working on a quarterly basis. Maybe that's useful to see. I could put the due date in there just by clicking that and save it. And now you can see, if I go back to projects, that it's got that due date in there as well. So you can really customize this however you want. Let's carry on. So the next thing we've got, and the final thing of these screens, is a dashboard. Now in a dashboard, there are loads of different things that you can create. And the way you do that is just by dragging them onto this blank canvas. So I'm going to start with number tile because that's probably the easiest. By bringing this number tile on, I'm just working again through these drop downs. So maybe I want to show number of tasks, and I can select tasks and I can count them. And so now I know across the board I have 7 tasks. Now you'll see that there is the option to have a filter in there. And this is why, if I just say this and go back to my projects, this is why I put these little filters in, just to demonstrate that you can break this down per project. So if I go back to my screen builder here and click on my number of tasks, I can edit this. I could say number of tasks in bars boats. I can then add my filter in to show bars boats, save that, and it will reduce it down to 3. Looks a bit squashed, but if I come out of this and go to the project, it does display it in perfect ways. And obviously you could do the same for the other one, gym shoes, as well. So you can have a total, or you can start to filter it down depending on the actual customer. Next up, we have a pie chart. And let's just drop this next to it. So a pie chart, again, will allow you to read information. So in this case, tasks. And again, I can filter it by each project if I wanted to. I'm not going to do that anymore because you've seen the benefit of that and how you can make it work. But I just want to group these by, in this case, status. Do I want to show the values always, or do I want them to pop up when I hover? I'll show them always. And I want the results to be by count. Now, I've made some assumptions that people understand the difference between count and sum, but let me just kind of identify that in case you're unsure. So count would be, how many tasks do I have overall? It's counting the number of tasks. A sum would be, in a different example, let's say I have, going back to that sales pipeline, I want to do a pie chart to show all my opportunities that are at quote stage. If I've got 10 opportunities at quote stage, by selecting things by count, it will just show 10. By selecting things by sum, it will add a numerical value on there to say there's 10 opportunities at quote stage, however, they're worth £10,000 or whatever it might be. So in this case, we'll do them by count, and I can see straight away that across everything, I've got 1 in the backlog, 4 in progress, 2 that have been completed. This is being read by these tables, but it will also work from these other ones too. So if, for example, I move this one across to completed and go back to my dashboard, that's now updated. It's got 3 in completed, 3 in progress, and 1 in the backlog. So it does it in real time. Line charts and bar charts are very, very similar. It's just a different way of displaying the data. But let me just drop this in here. And this time I'm going to use something a bit different. Let's use projects. And the reason I'm using projects is because I have some numerical values in there. So I want these to be grouped by due date. So I've basically in my table put, when do I think these projects can be completed by? And I've got that end date in there, or when is a customer demanded they're completed by? It's probably a better way of saying it. I'm going to show this on the graph. So this is going to be my axis across the bottom. Do I want it in days, weeks, months, or years? Well, I know that I've got 2 that are quite far apart. So I'll put this in month. Now this time I'm going to use sum. So there are fields on my projects table which gives these following information. It gives an invoice number, an invoice cost. So what are we invoicing the customer for? How much is it going to cost us to do internally? And what is the profit between those? So quite simply, invoice minus cost. So let's put invoice on there. We're going to save that. And I can see on this now that, you know, £5,000 in September, and I've got £25,000 in December. A line chart might not be the best way to represent that. So let's just do exactly the same thing on a bar chart, and you'll just see how those look slightly different. So I'll race through this because I've just explained through it already. And invoice on there, save it. So what you can now see is a bit of a better visual representation of where those are. I guess a line chart would be really useful if you're trying to track any patterns or means, but for this purpose of this, I think a bar chart works a little bit better. Okay, there's two more things to show you. The first one is going to be a funnel chart. Now, a funnel chart, well, let me build it first and I'll explain how it's used in different lines of work. So I use the tasks again. I'm not going to bother with a filter. I want these to be grouped by status, and we've got two options here. We've got historic or we've got current. Let me use historic first, and I'm going to again count the number of tasks we have, and I'll explain how this works, and I'll go through the differences as well. So a historic funnel chart is basically trying to identify a process by which tasks pass through. So if I go to my board very quickly, I can see I've got one in the backlog. In fact, why am I doing that? It's displayed on here. I've got one in the backlog. I've got 3 in progress. I've got 3 that have been completed. That isn't represented by this historical funnel chart. What this chart is trying to show is each individual task will go through each one of these stages. So I have 7 overall. They've all been in the backlog at some point. They've now progressed. So I've now got 6 that have been through progress. That's the 3 that are currently there, the 3 that are completed. And I've got 3 in a completed status. Now, the reason why this historic funnel chart might be beneficial to people is more in a sales pipeline. So how sales team likes to operate is they will say, and I'll use those same statuses that I quoted earlier on, we might have interest as this top level. We then might have demonstration. We then might have quotes. We then might have conversions to customers. And historic data is very useful because it will show you any potential blockages in this funnel. So you might have loads and loads of interest. You might get 90% of that going through to demo, which is unrealistic, I know, but I'm just trying to skew these figures to give the example. So 90% go through to demo, but only 5% then go through to quote, and only 2% convert. Well, that would suggest to me that there is a huge issue with the way that we are demonstrating our software or our product, because from that 90%, only 5 are passing through. So seeing this historical data in a funnel chart makes that information easy to see. However, we can also build this as a current funnel chart. And if I save that, you can probably guess what this shows. This is another representation of this pie chart. It's showing we've got 1 in the backlog, 3 in progress, and 3 in a completed stage as well. So different ways of using that screen. And the final thing that we've got on there is our record grid. I'll just drag this across. Now, our record grid is basically saying, let's pull some information from one of our tables. So if I go to projects, if I go to the filter, there isn't any on there. If I go to the display fields, maybe I just want to know the name and the profit, maybe the due date as well. So I am looking at this from a management level, and I'm saying, okay, this dashboard's great. I can see all these tasks and where it's at, but actually, to get this profit in, what dates am I due to hit? That's the key information that I want without having to look in the projects. It's all available to me on a dashboard. So those are all the different types of screens that we can do. I hope that made sense. Again, the question box is open for anything that you might want to ask. I have a couple of things in here already, But before I go to anything, I want to go back to this Gantt chart. And I want to explain how I've managed to create this, because I am conscious that it could be a little trickier. In fact, I'll go through each one of these as well. So we'll start off with the task percentages. Go to Table Explorer. As I mentioned before, this is just a manual input. So all I've done is I've selected a percentage field from the list, and it just allows me to populate that percentage in manually. So nothing too complicated about that. However, in the projects field, you'll see we've actually got two formulas in here, and it's this total complete which shows that percentage. Now, before I go to that, let me just talk through this one, because it's like a warm-up into one that's a little bit more complicated. So to calculate profit, all I've done is I've gone invoice minus cost equals profit. So on the left-hand side, if I click into this, I will show you this formula. Let me just drag this to the side so you can hopefully still see this table. All I've literally done, I'll do it from scratch again just to show you how this works, is I have gone, okay, from this table, from my table I'm in now, it shows these fields. I just want to create invoice. I want to take away, to subtract, the cost, and I want that to be displayed as a monetary value. And that's it. That's all I've done to create that calculation which says invoice minus cost equals profit. And if I go back to my project and show this, we've literally got invoice is 25,000, minus the cost is 14,000. These are all fields you can edit. You cannot edit this profit field. That is just calculating that difference. Now then, with the total complete, this is where it's got a little bit more confusing. So I'm going to click on that. I'm actually going to drag this across so you can see those fields, because that's where it's data being pulled from. And I'm going to show this formula. So the reason why it's a bit more complicated is that it's got these dots in brackets, which and it's got a few brackets on there, which maybe isn't as obvious. All I've done in this is I have referred to this next table task, which is currently hidden. If I click on that, that makes it a bit clearer. So I wanted to know the sum of all my percentage completed statuses. So hypothetically, if I've got 5 tasks and they're all at 10%, I want to know the sum of those is 50. So the sum of my tasks completed, again, I can start this from scratch to show you how I'm doing it. The sum, and in here, I want to know task completed, it automatically puts that dot in there, divided by the count. So how many of these have we got? I've already said it's going to be 5 of those tasks. Oh, I've not put it in the right place. It needs to fall within that bracket. Validate field. Oh, it doesn't need to be outside the bracket. I do apologize. I'll tell you what, let me just come out of this and instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, show you exactly what I did. It's in that bracket of circles. That's where I'm going wrong. So if that can validate that field, it proves that formula is valid. So what it's saying is the sum of those tasks completed is 50%, because we've got 5 at 10%, divided by the count, which is the number of tasks, and that will give us that percentage average. So that is how we've calculated that percentage. And when you show it in the actual thing, again, it's not an editable field. That's where it is in there. Just to prove that that works, let's go into one of these tasks. Let's move this keyword to, let's move it to 70. Save that in there. And now that's showing us 70% complete. So that shows that they have that impact on that total. It's nice to play around with it. You can get really creative with this stuff. It will obviously tell you if there's errors, which is what you just experienced with me doing, because I put it in the wrong type of brackets. I put it in square instead of circular, but hopefully it's easy to figure out. And we're here for anything that you're not certain of. Okay, another question that's come in. Why does it look different when you're making a board compared to the others? Okay, so if I go back to Screen Builder, in board, you'll see how the user interface is very different. Here, it guides you through step by step, whereas here, it's making you work through all these drop downs. And the answer quite simply is, we are redesigning the way that we do screens. And you've had a sneak preview into what all these are going to look like over time. So this board here is going to be the way that we ask people to work moving forward. We've had feedback to say it's a lot easier to work through compared to this, which some have found a little complex. I mean, you can work through these drop downs, it kind of makes sense, but it's not always obvious what some of these fields do. So the answer is, this is our new look Gridfox, and you'll see this being introduced in these throughout the next few months. You keep selecting list on some criteria. What does this mean? Okay, now if you haven't seen some of the previous webinars, you're right, I'm conscious this is probably not going to make a lot of sense to you. Basically, the fields that we have in here, one of them is called list, and that is exactly what I'm selecting. I'm selecting from a list field. Now in this list field, once I have it, I can create list items. So I can show in here, what do I want people to pre-select? It's not a free text box. When I'm adding a record, they have to pre-select one of these options. So list in Screen Builder was quite simply saying, if I go to board, for example, and I did it by card colors, yeah, that list is the status in here. So without having any list fields, I would not be able to segregate them by card color, for example. Can you show financials on a number tile? You can. So if I go back to my dashboard and I go to Screen Builder, have I got data to do this? Let's have a go. So if I go to projects, this is where I know that some fields live, and quite simply here. So let's have a look at the potential profit across all of our projects. Well, it's right there. So the answer is yes, you can, and that's exactly how you do it. But you obviously need to make sure that in your table there is some numerical data in order to get that in there. And the final question I've got at the moment is, can you explain the purpose of a record grid? So that's this in here. Yeah, it's a good question, because all the information I have here is shown in my projects. So why potentially would you want that to show on your dashboard? It's just like a summary. So I've only got, what, 7 or 8 fields on here, which isn't too demanding, but you might have a project table with 20 or 30 on there. And to then start scrolling through and trying to find, or opening the record and trying to find the information you want across each of those can be quite time consuming. So what a dashboard and what a record grid does is it tries to limit the amount of time spent so that you can just literally highlight that key information that you want on there. So as a director of a company, maybe I just want to know, what's the project, how much profit is it potentially going to bring to the business, and when is it due to finish? So that's just a quick way of highlighting it for me on there. And I think at the moment, that's all the questions that we have. So I'll leave it open a couple of minutes just to ensure no one hasn't left without anything being unanswered. And I will remind you of the next webinars that are coming up. Number 4 is going to look at workflows and permissions. Now, this one and the ID and data relationships is the ones that I will class as a little bit more complicated, a little bit more complex. So if you're ready for them, great. And if you are watching those and do get confused, don't panic, because as I mentioned before, we will rerun everything and allow these videos to be posted on our webinar site so that you can watch them back time and time again. And I'll also be there for anything that you have questions on, so feel free to reach out. But the next one's going to be on the 9th of September. I know we're normally doing these 2 weeks apart. You'll have to apologise, I've got some annual leave coming up, so we've rescheduled it to the week after, and then we'll fall back in line with the 2 weeks for that final one in there. Doesn't look like any more questions have come in, so once again, just like to thank you for your time and your engagement, and I look forward to working with you all at some point in the future if we're not already. Thank you.